essentially legally chose, with the help of lawyers, to disguise what was torture under international law and make it into what the president called his alternative set of procedures.
Those lawyers came from the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel. In April of 2002, a memo drafted by John Yoo and signed by Jay Bybee rewrote the rules on interrogations.
The Bush administration's lawyers essentially did this by redefining what torture means. We see this in the so-called torture memo that was signed on April 1st, 2002, which essentially says in order for something to be torture, it has to cause pain of a severity so great that it would be, quote, equivalent to major organ failure or even death, close quote. And this allowed President Bush to continually say, we do not torture, at the same time as the United States was waterboarding prisoners, for example.
6 people played a very substantive role. They were John Yoo and Jay Bybee at the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department. They were David Addington, who I see as the intellectual spearhead of all this, in the Vice President's office. Alberto Gonzalez, counselor to the President in the President's office. And OSD General Counsel Jim Haynes, and a 6th lawyer, Douglas Feith, who was Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the Pentagon.
Basically, they carved out all kinds of loopholes in the law so that they would really make it very hard for people to be convicted of torture.
But lawyers in the Justice Department went even further. John Yoo of the Office of Legal Counsel wrote that wartime presidential powers trumped U.S. torture law. In December of 2005, John Yoo defended that position in a debate with Notre Dame professor Doug Cassell.
If the president deems that he's got to torture somebody, including by crushing the testicles of the person's child, there is no law that can stop that.
No treaty.
And also no law by Congress. That's what you wrote in the August 2002 memo.
I think it depends on why the president thinks he needs to do that.
And this message got out to the field. This message was out there in every private knapsack, that the gloves were off and that these people were subhuman and that we could pretty much do anything we wanted to them. Then you get Abu Ghraib. I think the first inclination I had of it was when the Secretary of State walked through the door that separated our 2 adjoining offices on the 7th floor of the State Department building and informed me that he had been informed that a number of photographs were going to come out and they were going to be quite horrendous. And they were going to show U.S. armed forces treating badly Iraqi prisoners at a place called Abu Ghraib in Iraq. That's the first indication that I had that we were doing some pretty grim things to detainees in the so-called global war on terror. This was not just soldiers pushing the envelope. This was probably, and this came to me rather rapidly, this was probably a result of policies that had been aggressively administered by the administration which I served. And that was a very disturbing thing. That was probably as disturbing as the fact that the pictures were disturbing. And then people say, well, my critics say, well, that was a few bad eggs, a few bad apples. May have been true in 1 or 2 cases, but in most cases, those few bad apples even were incited, if you will, to do what they did, I think, by the fact that at the highest policy level, this attitude was invoked.
And this was part of a deliberate policy. It's hard to say whether the motivation was to confuse the soldier on the ground, but unquestionably that was the effect. The impact of this reign of distortion and confusion about the standards is so widespread. It's difficult to calculate the impact because, of course, we know about many, many prisoners who were subjected to the so-called enhanced interrogation program, but also just the drift of lawlessness that took hold in the treatment of prisoners in Afghanistan and Iraq because of this obscuring of the standards.
We actually murdered people. We murdered a couple of people in Afghanistan, in Bagram, Afghanistan, as early as December 2002, I think it was. And as I understand now, the murder total, clearly murder total, is up to as many as 40 out of about 190 or 195 or something like that who have died in detention.
In the final days of his presidency, George W. Bush granted an interview to Britt Hume of Fox News Sunday, where he defended the interrogation practices of U.S. intelligence agencies.
The techniques were necessary and are necessary to be used on a rare occasion to get information necessary to protect the American people. One such person who gave us information was Khalek Sheikh Mohammed. He was the mastermind of the September the 11th, 2001 attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people on our soil.
There are great claims made by the President Bush on down that attacks were averted by the use of torture. And the fact is that the American people, if you tell them in polls that torture might avert an attack, will tend to support it under those conditions.
There's a nuclear warhead missing.
Torture is a common event in the fictional world of Fox TV's 24. The long-running drama stars super agent Jack Bauer, who tortures information out of suspects in order to prevent imminent terrorist attacks.
Make a sound, and I will blow your brains out all over the windshield.
Where is it?
I don't know!
Where is he now? Where's my wife?
Okay.
That torture should be a form of entertainment week in and week out on these television programs which perpetrate the myth that torture brings about beneficial consequences. Yeah, it's absolutely false, and the reverse is true.
We should be pressing this guy with everything we've got.
Let me just say very clearly that there is no Jack Bauer in the real world. The people that use torture and abuse and act like Jack Bauer in the real world consistently get negative results. They don't get valid intelligence information.
Matthew Alexander spent 14 years in the United States Air Force, including 7 years in military intelligence. In March of 2006, he arrived in Iraq to join the U.S. Army as an interrogator.
That idea that the Jack Bauers of the world are saving us by using these brutal techniques is a complete myth. People talk hypothetically about a ticking time bomb, but we live the ticking time bomb every day. We were dealing with suicide bombers. We often captured people just after suicide bombers had left their houses to conduct missions. Pragmatically, we understood that if we used torture or abuse to get information to stop and save lives, that Al-Qaeda would turn around and use that to recruit new fighters, and it'd be counterproductive in the long run. And we knew that because every day in our prison there was foreign fighters who were telling us that the number one reason they decided to come to Iraq and join the jihad and fight against us was because of torture and abuse at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay.
For so many years we've heard about the benefits of the policies of torture and cruel treatment from the previous administration, how we needed it, how it saved American lives. I hear from the military and from intelligence personnel exactly the opposite, that it cost us intelligence, that it cost us American lives, and that it made us less safe. Human Rights First has been working for 4 or 5 years or more with a group of retired generals and admirals, military leaders who are deeply concerned about the policies of torture and cruelty against prisoners in U.S. custody.
Some retired military leaders have gone further and are calling for those who ordered torture to be held accountable. Among them is the Major General who led the Army's investigation into the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. In a June 2008 report on prisoner abuse published by Physicians for Human Rights, retired General Anthony Taguba wrote,
"There is no longer any doubt as to whether the current administration has committed war crimes. The only question is whether those who ordered the use of torture will be held to account."